Harvey, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Graham. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Yeah, cool. Perfect. Cool. So I'm Harvey McGivern. I'm a director of Community Works. We're a social enterprise working on a number of different projects, all looking at kind of strengthening communities and accelerating low carbon economies across the UK. My colleague Alex actually spoke to you guys in June about another one of our projects we're working on. We work on various things together. Basically, what I'm going to speak to you today about is a company called Olio. So Olio, we've kind of been doing some work with for the past 6 months. Some of you might have heard of Olio, but I'm sure lots of you won't have. And it's basically a free local sharing app which connects people with their neighbours so they can give away rather than throw away their spare food and other household items. I've personally been a big fan of Olio for the last 6 years. And over the last 6 months, we've been helping them raise awareness through a number of different partnerships. So these have been with brands, charities, organizations tackling the climate crisis, universities. So we're looking at doing a pilot with the University of Suffolk to kind of raise awareness through all their students, but also how do we then look at doing that for all the universities in the country. And then councils, at the moment, the conversations we're having to date is councils at the county level. So on a number of other projects we've worked on, that we've partnered with Essex, Kent, Suffolk county councils. And so we're speaking to them about kind of raising awareness of Olio within their counties, but also like their climate change networks with other local authorities. But it's kind of really at the individual level that this matters. And so it's kind of great to speak to you guys at that kind of parish and town council level, where you have kind of direct connection with people in the local community. So Olio was basically founded by Tessa and Sasha. Olio are a startup, but they've been going for 8 years now. And the
Could,
idea for Olio came, oh yeah,
well, could you switch into slide mode, please, Harvey? At the moment, we're seeing all of your PowerPoint stuff. So
yes,
if you go
can.
back to say from the current slide on the whatever it is, yeah.
I think the issue is it will remove my notes. Is that a problem if I do it like that? Oh, is that okay doing it this way? Sorry. Otherwise I can't see my notes. Yeah, sorry, I can't hear any of you. You're all on mute, but I'll
Fair
take it.
enough. Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So Olio was founded by Tessa and Sasha. Um, so the idea for Olio came from Tessa was moving back to the UK from Switzerland. She had a load of food that she basically was told by the removal people she couldn't take with her. And so the idea of throwing this food away, she's a farmer's daughter, was just inconceivable to her. So she kind of set off down the road trying to give away this food. But at the time, there was no kind of way of doing this. And if you knock on someone's door randomly trying to give them food, they think you're a crazy person. So there was no kind of way of doing this. And ultimately, she wasn't able to give away the food. What she ended up doing was sneaking it back into in her luggage and taking it back with her that way. But that was where kind of the idea for Olio came from. When she got back to the UK, she kind of looked into the stats on food waste and found out they were fairly staggering. So basically, just to give you a few of them, so a third of all food produced ends up going to waste. And most of this is perfectly good to be eaten at the time it's thrown away. 8 to 10% of global greenhouse emissions comes from food that's not consumed. And at the same time as this, within the UK, we have 11 million people that have experienced food insecurity, and 4 million children start the day hungry because they don't have enough food to eat. So this was where she teamed up with Sasha, and it was this idea around how do you take this food that people are just throwing away, that is contributing to the climate crisis, and redistribute it so that people who need it most can come and collect it. So basically, when Olio first launched, it was just the idea was always around food waste, sharing food, and 50% of all food waste takes place within the home. So it's how do you create the ability for households to share with each other. This has now evolved into giving away basically any household item or anything that's going to waste or is going to be chucked away but can be given a second life with someone else. And how that kind of evolved was basically people were putting other stuff on the app all the time, and they were having to take it down because they were just seen as a food waste app. But ultimately, it was like, well, this is a major problem in itself. So how do we expand out so that now people can share anything they want on Olio, and people can come and collect it from them? There's also other things. They're constantly trialing new things. Like they have various deal sections, this kind of things that they've teamed up with supermarkets, that kind of stuff. But there's also a borrow section so that people within the app can, for basically if like neighbors have lawnmowers, tools, this kind of thing. One of the things I find crazy is there's like 20 streets on this house, 20 houses on this street, and every single one of them has their own lawnmower that gets used about 3 or 4 times a summer. And it's like, just seems absolutely crazy that there's not some kind of sharing going on between the communities with those kind of things. Um, so to give you an idea of the scale, so basically 8 million people have now joined Olio, and 4 million of those are in the UK, and approximately 5 million items are shared on Olio each month. And these collective actions have prevented an estimated 201,000 tons of CO2 emissions. So it's small individual actions, but when you group it together on a large scale, it can have a significant impact on the climate crisis. So then basically the whole kind of concept behind Olio is about strengthening communities and reconnecting people with their neighbors once again. And this leads to a number of other benefits as well. People are making kind of new connections and friends. There's a lot of kind of mental health benefits because people who have previously felt quite isolated within their communities are now kind of meeting new people through sharing through Olio. And also it gives people a way to take immediate action on doing something on the climate crisis. The climate crisis feels overwhelming. It's like waiting for big businesses and government to do something about it. And there's so much kind of talk about it. It's like, what can we do as an individual level? Well, this gives people a way to take immediate action that then they kind of feel good that they're contributing. Because when you look at grouping all those stats together, it does have a significant impact. So another major development for Olio was when they introduced the Food Waste Heroes program. So if we take, for example, Tesco, they've worked with Tesco now for 3 years. Previously, Tesco's paid a waste company to come and take the food that was going to go off, and that food would be chucked away. Now what happens is an Olio volunteer, so they've got 100,000 volunteers around the country. An Olio volunteer will go in to the supermarket, collect the food that is at that point still perfectly good to be eaten, but might be going off the next day. The Olio volunteer takes it back to their house and will redistribute it via the Olio app, and people in the local community will come and collect that food. So basically, it's obviously a lot better for the climate because that food is no longer being chucked, it's being given away and consumed. It's better for the individuals who can get access to fresh, free food within the area. And it's obviously better for the businesses because Tesco's no longer has to say, we're chucking this food. They can show, we're giving this food away, it's reducing this impact on the climate, and it's also going to these people in the local communities. So yeah, this is just how it works. So like I said, basically, a member of staff at Tesco's will prepare the food, set it aside. An Olio volunteer, usually volunteers will either walk or cycle and take some kind of trolley. They'll come and collect the food, take it back to their home, put it on the app, and the people then come and collect it. And Olio will then produce a report for the business to show them kind of the impact it's had, but also testimonials from real people within the local communities who it has helped. They've worked with Tesco's for 3 years, but ultimately now they've pretty much got all the major supermarkets. Morrison's and Waitrose will be kind of announced later in the year. Sainsbury's and Asda came on earlier this year, and we're now looking at kind of whilst it's expanding and getting more and more businesses, how do you also help individuals, smaller businesses? So, like one of the people I've been speaking to is a person who runs National Caterers Association. So it's lots of individual catering companies. I've previously worked in wedding photography, and you just see kind of this huge amount of waste from these big events. So it's how do you give the ability to take that food that would be chucked away or was going to waste to be able to redistribute via the app, basically. Um, so in terms of this is basically just in the 6 months I've been working with Olio, they send around a newsletter kind of to their staff each month, and it has just pages of all these kind of testimonials about people that are using the app, and it's helping. A lot of it can be people who are struggling and need access to food, people who might be going to food banks, but there's kind of this stigma attached to food banks that it's seen as a handout, whereas Olio, ultimately anyone can come and collect the food, and its primary aim is about tackling food waste and the climate crisis. So someone feels a lot less, um, a lot feels a lot better about getting food from Olio than having to go to food banks. And food banks can be kind of a downward spiral, whereas Olio kind of is there to support people as they need it, as and when. And there's a lot more kind of choice on Olio. There's been people who like there was one the other day who someone said they had HIV and their doctor had recommended Olio as a way to kind of get the variety of food they needed in their diet throughout that period. So then how might parish councils and community members get involved? So Olio basically have around 50,000 ambassadors already helping spread the word. Um, when I say an ambassador, basically it's someone who's gone onto the website, signed up as an ambassador, downloaded the ambassador pack, and um, share Olio within their local community. Um, they they've tried lots of different things, and they've had kind of different ways of trying to get the message out there. But ultimately, word of mouth has throughout been the most powerful way of doing this, and still remains kind of the best way of getting the word out to people. What we've been trying to do is kind of leverage partnerships where, so like an individual ambassador might go out and knock on 50 doors around their local community. It's like, how do we look at an organization? So we're speaking to um, the Climate Coalition, which has like World Wildlife Federation, National Trust, all these kind of people, whereby they've got members who are obviously very interested in sustainability. So how does the ambassador organization, such as the National Trust, share it with all their members, so that you're kind of each ambassador is getting it out there to more people and helping raise awareness quicker in that way. And that's basically the work we've been doing. And then the one other thing to say is, whilst it's about kind of creating awareness of the app and getting people to sign up to the app, it's also making people aware of the opportunity to volunteer. As I said, they've already got 100,000 volunteers around the country. They're bringing on new businesses all the time. And so there's always opportunities to volunteer to be one of these food waste heroes. Basically, you go into a business, collect the food, and redistribute it to those that need it within the community. And that's it from me. So yeah, hope that was kind of clear. And as I said, I'm not from Olio. I'm Community Works, but we've been doing this work with Olio. And yeah, happy to take any questions and hear your thoughts.
That was very inspiring, Harvey. A great story. Whilst you were talking, I downloaded the app and was astonished to discover there's 138 people around me that I had no idea were using Olio or knew about Olio. So the word is going to get spread, isn't it? I had a couple of questions about the groups you're using to spread the word. I would have thought that children were a wonderful target, where you talk to schools or the Boy Scouts or something like that. Just a thought, but I guess everyone has had those thoughts for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good that it's one where it's so like universities, for example, is another one where again it's uh with schools, one of the things I've struggled with personally is like how do you rather than going to individual schools, for example, it's like where are these organizations that you can kind of get it out to schools as efficiently as possible. There's kind of like Olio have a marketing team, but ultimately it's like uh, they're constantly looking for new ways to do it. And it's where that can they put their resource in the best place possible. And so it's yeah, trying to find a way that you could target schools, for example, that's going to get it out to as many schools as possible rather than having to go to individual schools. But you guys might know organizations that can do that kind of thing.
Well, immediately one thinks of the trade unions, you know, National Union of Teachers, or the organizations like the Headmasters Association, whatever they're called, but they all get together several times a year, and you could spread the word very quickly that way, I would have thought.
Yes.
Um, and as a part of the world that's just got a brand new MP, because there was only one on the Isle of Wight beforehand, now we have two. So I wonder whether MPs are doing anything to spread the word through their parishes and areas. I shall ask our MP whether he knows anything about you and just put it in with all my other complaints to him about
Yes.
the lousy job he's doing. Anyway, let me pass on to other people. Stuart, you were the first to raise your hand, please.
Hi, thanks for that. It's really interesting. I'd never heard of them.
Yeah.
So to suddenly realise that there are 4 million people in the UK involved in this with 100,000 volunteers is quite amazing.
Yes.
But it did raise a few questions in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've done a little bit of work with the South Lakes Climate Action Group, who run Waste to Welfare, and they collect about to expire food from local supermarkets and shops.
Yeah.
And they run a community kitchen and a community cafe.
Yeah.
Their sort of motto is consume, cook, or compost. Do the
Yeah.
volunteers who collect all this about to expire food have a means of doing something with it if they can't get people to take it?
Yeah, so to date, basically, it hasn't become an issue because so at the moment, the issue on Olio and where all their work is going to is increasing supply of food on Olio because when food is put on Olio, it's pretty much collected within 2 hours, and it's there's not much that's not collected basically. The food waste heroes, they're allowed to keep kind of 10% of the food for themselves. But yes, it's uh, that's not been the issue to date because, as I said, it's the supply side rather than the demand side. There seems to have always been this demand that it will be collected and the food is always got, whereas what they want to do is increase the supply because there's still that demand there for it. Um, I don't know specifically what their process is for if someone does have food left over. But knowing Olio as I have over the past 6 months, they will have some process for that that would no doubt be along those lines, I would have thought.
Okay, and just a quick supplementary question.
Yeah.
Um, would it be useful for distributing garden produce? I mean, I currently have a glut of pears, apples, squashes, tomatoes, aubergines.
Yes, very much so, 100%. And basically, I had a call 2 weeks ago with the Royal Horticultural Society about just that kind of thing. It's like you often see a box outside a house with a load of cucumbers in because people have a glut of cucumbers, whatever it is. It's the perfect way to kind of distribute that and get it out to people. Yes, completely.
Excellent, I'm sold. Thank you.
So sorry, Peter, it's your turn. Big pardon.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I like it. I seem to be on your kind of mailing list. I must have at some stage um, got on it. One of the big questions I've got is, I mean, I run the East Cambridge Climate Action Network. I've got 400 plus people on our mailing list. Do you already have almost like a ready-made news item for me? In other words, can I have some nice pictures? Can I have the text all there? So all I have to do is to stick it into the newsletter. I'm thinking that I'm going to invite people to become food waste champions. because it links in with my energy saving champions idea and my water saving champions idea, for which I wish to spread out into the 36 parishes which consist of East Cambridgeshire. But the biggest problem I have as a volunteer, and probably other people as well, is just having the time. So you've got almost like an oven ready document, which actually all I need to do is to copy and paste into a newsletter, which I do on a regular basis. That's great. If it requires anything more like searching your website for bits and pieces like that, that takes me time, and then it gets down, goes down the list of priorities for me. That's kind of one question. The other thing is, how does this fit in with Too Good to Go?
So on the Too Good to Go point, so Too Good to Go, they do that. Basically, you pay, so they take some food and you buy it or whatever. Um, they fit alongside each other, as in both exist. There's other organisations like Fair Share, and the Neighbourly, these kind of ones, which again are kind of targeting business. So it's like if a business or a community interest company wants to collect food from the supermarket, we would, as Olio, recommend they use Fair Share, because Olio is more about it's got to be distributed from an individual household. With all of these things, there's another one in France called Give that is more household items, but ultimately, and there's like things like Facebook Marketplace, Free Cycle, all of these, they're all kind of working in tandem to achieve the same mission as what Olio wants to achieve. So, like with Give in France, the Olio founders have conversations with them about how can we partner together and do stuff together. The two, because they're slightly different, Too Good to Go sits alongside Olio in that it's a different proposition for the supermarkets. I don't know quite whether the supermarkets are using, like Tesco, for example, are doing Too Good to Go and Olio. But as far as I understand, several will be, I would have thought.
You actually mentioned that you actually used the phrase, I think it was waste hero, waste heroes or something like that, where people can go to Tesco's, pick up the waste and then redistribute it. I don't
Yeah.
know, what's that the phrase? Yeah. And how does that work with um, with Tesco's? I'm thinking in terms of how do they have to become an Olio ambassador to do that? And for that matter, what's the difference between an Olio volunteer and an Olio ambassador? And how do they then relate to collecting food from Tesco's, etc.?
Yeah, cool. So an Olio ambassador is simply someone who's gone onto the website, downloaded the ambassador pack, which is like leaflets or posters, and is spreading the word about Olio to their local community. The food waste hero, which is the volunteer, is someone who's signed up to be a volunteer. They have to go through a proper training process. They have to, it's checked that they've got the right fridge to store the food once they get it, all that kind of stuff, all the health and safety things. And then Olio there's like a team that manage all the volunteers, and they will assign them where they're going on a given day to go and collect the food from a store. They would then bring it back to their home and redistribute it. They put the food they've got from Tesco on the app, and people will come to their home and collect it from their home.
And you provide free, or Olio provides free training courses for these people.
Olio have to train every one of those volunteers from a food safety perspective. So also from a health and safety perspective, once the food leaves Tesco, it's Olio who then take on the responsibility of anything that happens with that food. So Olio is very careful about making sure that every volunteer is trained.
And just what last point?
Yeah.
What's the business model for Olio?
So basically, they are a private company. Basically, they looked at. I've read in depth about this because it comes up a lot. But so they looked at charity, community interest company, but ultimately they want to create massive scale. And the only way to really do this, their aim is 1 billion Olioers by 2030, which is ambitious. but the only way to do this is to get private investment. So they're very much believers in profit for purpose. They want to become a profitable company. They're nowhere near being profitable yet. So basically, the app is completely free for people to use, or there is now an Olio supporter version where you can donate almost on the app to give some money to Olio if you
So
want.
just one last point. What's
Yeah.
going to happen when isn't your business model going to fall away when it becomes compulsory for local authorities to collect food waste? Or is it really the stage before food waste we're talking about?
Say that again, sorry.
So
Okay.
I was saying that I think it's 2026 that all local authorities have to collect food waste. Now, I think I'm probably what you're really doing is kind of pre-food waste. In other words, the food which is usable is collected before it becomes food waste. So I've really answered my own question there.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Then it's stopping food waste because you want to give it away before it becomes food waste. But the other thing on the business model is so their main source of income is Tesco's, for example, would pay 3 years ago paid a waste company to come and chuck that food. Tesco's now pay Olio to
Oh,
come
okay.
and redistribute that food. So Tesco's are still paying the same amount of money, but that food is being distributed in the local community rather than it being chucked away. But equally, Olio basically has venture capital funding, um, and at the moment they're running at about 30% of their income kind of covers the running costs of Olio. So it's moving towards profitability, but it's not there yet, and it's going to be a long journey to get towards profitability because ultimately all the income is going towards trying to grow Olio to make it as big as possible. So the aim is to get to profit for purpose, but ultimately it's funded. The gap is funded by venture capital that isn't yet there.
Great, thanks.
No worries. One other, sorry, answer on your previous question, your first question about being able to share it easily. At the moment, there's the ambassador pack and the stuff on the website, but that is more you'd have to go and download stuff and kind of put it in together. One thing I'm going to speak to Olio about, and I'll come back to you guys on, is almost just having that generic newsletter copy because at the moment we've kind of done it on an individual basis. So like we did one with Feeding Britain last week, we're looking at World Horticultural Society and all of those, and it's kind of tailoring it to their audience because they want it kind of tailored slightly, and it's looking at how that partnership works. But I agree, I think it needs for like you guys to be able to just have a generic thing that you can copy and paste because otherwise, as you say, it goes down the priority list.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Hilary, would you like to go ahead, please?
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering whether I'm a sort of a bit small to be part of this group. I'm part of a climate action group, which is it was sort of set up from a small parish council in Cambridgeshire, and we've got in our community we've got a project which would, I suppose, be in direct competition with Olio actually, because we have a community fridge and a need project based in Bedfordshire, which we act as a hub for. We've set up a project between it was actually sort of organised between two churches, Baptist and Anglican churches in the village, and serves quite a wide area. People have to physically come to the hub. It's open in most mornings and some, I think it's one afternoon. But we collect from local supermarkets, including Marks and Spencer's in St Neots. And we're already competing with other people in terms of we're not the only people picking food waste up from there.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about the sustainability of the whole process. I mean, we're already finding that the supermarkets are actually getting better at not wasting stuff. We've got, you know, we're still saving lots of food waste through the community fridge side of things, and we also redistribute local people's things that they bring. You know, the allotment people now know where we are, and so we do distribute vegetables and so forth as well. But it's
Yeah.
all a kind of first come, first served thing. But if the supermarkets we're dealing with then go to somewhere like Olio because they think, oh, well, this is, it's a bigger organization, then we don't have this stuff to distribute, which in one way is quite a good thing, because at least, the whole point about is avoiding waste. But we do have quite a few people now who rely on this as a means of supplementing their income.
Yes, absolutely. And so basically, I've had this conversation with Feeding Britain. I don't know if you know Feeding Britain. They're kind of they've got almost 1,000 organizations that run kind of frontline, whether it's food pantries, food kitchens, these kind of stuff. And I've had exactly that kind of conversation with them. As it's more, how can Olio supplement that? Basically, one of the things for them is there's a lot of pressure on the food pantries to get the food and be able to provide it. And by being able to tell people about Olio that come to the pantry, it releases some of the pressure and gives them access to food, because a lot of the food from Olio as well comes from individual households that are sharing it on Olio, as opposed to it just coming from the supermarkets.
Yeah, the community fridge does that though.
From individual households.
Anybody can bring things into the community fridge.
Yes.
It's a national organisation.
Yes, but I imagine there's supplementary food on Olio, for example, as well as what you guys are doing. That if those people also went on Olio, whilst you say it's people are relying on it, it gives another option as well as going to the community fridge. They might be able to get some food on Olio as well. And then in terms of the supermarket, so I don't know if basically we had this conversation with them is could they almost be supplying the pantries from Olio, and it didn't work. Basically, Olio has to do household to household, but so a fair share. I don't know if you guys use fair share. Fair share and Neighbourly are the two kind of.
Neighbourly is
So
the one that
if you're a business or a community organisation, you can get food from the supermarkets through Neighbourly or fair share. Whereas, and that's kind of, I guess, split out between Olio, and I don't know how that split quite works. But basically, when we're speaking to Feeding Britain, the Olio co-founder is saying, like, recommending that they go and speak to Neighbourly and Fair Share, because we can't provide that service in terms of getting the food directly from the supermarket to their pantries. But the Neighbourly and Fair Share can, as in that's the way for it to access. But that within the Feeding Britain pantries and all that kind of stuff, and they've got lots of food deserts whereby there's no food kind of within certain areas. It's how do they get potentially people to sign up as food waste heroes that can go a bit further afield and bring some of the Olio food to within that local community. So it's working out where there's crossovers and how it can provide an addition to and relieve some of the pressure on food banks and the pantries and that kind of stuff, as opposed to competing for it.
Yeah. I must say I have my doubts about the business model in terms of being able to make it work financially in the long run, because I think it kind of could have done a little while ago, but it's going to be struggling because everybody seems to be kind of getting onto this, and it doesn't. In some places, there's no people are doing it for nothing rather than asking, for a payment to do it.
Yes. It could change, as in I agree. It's the main source of income for Olio at the moment, but they're constantly testing new ways of income streams. So they have 4 million people on the app, well, 8 million, but 4 million in the UK. So they've recently introduced advertising on the app as again another income stream that they're testing. You have to be incredibly careful, because ultimately the Olio community is built on trust, and it's who are those people that are advertising, and annoying people with adverts is not a kind of a good business model in the sense of if it's going to dissuade people from using the app.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm really interested. It's in principle, it's a really good way of putting people in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, just one point. It's also like, and Alex, my who I work with at Community Works, again, it's like it doesn't necessarily, Olio isn't the solution in all areas, and actually there are some areas that already do this incredibly well because they've set it up in their local community as a way of doing it. And Alex has the same in his local community. But ultimately, it's how do you take that model that is working so well in that smaller community and expand it out to all the communities, which is what Olio is kind of providing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Mr. please.
Yes, Harvey and Hilary, actually, I'm interested in the question of sell-by dates. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of food that's wasted because when it hits the sell-by date, it has to be thrown away. So are you allowed, as Olio volunteers, to sell food beyond the sell-by date because you judge it's still palatable, which I think everybody knows that sell-by dates are quite conservative and a lot of waste happens. And we certainly at home, we're always eating yogurts that are a week out of date and they're always fine. So what's your attitude? And have you had any sort of legal problems with people complaining that they got food poisoning because of food they got from you?
So basically, there's something that's happening, and I kind of learned this from speaking to Yo Valley, actually, their yogurt company. But there's like I can't remember quite the terminology, but it's like used by or has to be some. There's like the terminology you use, it kind of creates the legal basis on what you can do. So if it's like must be, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's like must be consumed by the state, then you can't then give it to other people. But if it's like recommended use by date, which is what a lot of brands are moving over to, then it relies on the individual being able to tell for themselves by opening up the yogurt, smelling it, whatever, as to whether they would use it. Olio, as I said, takes full responsibility once the food has passed from the company to Olio. They have full responsibility for if there were food poisoning or anything like that, and they've never had any incidents yet. And
So is your guidance to your volunteers that they can, it's up to them to smell the food and take the responsibility for passing it on?
The food from the supermarkets, I don't know for certain, but I would imagine it's within the day. It's like the stuff that would be going into the trying to sell it at the end of the day stuff, and that they would have thrown out the next day. So it'll be on its final kind of use by date.
Yeah, but then can your volunteer, if in 2 days' time after that, the volunteer has somebody who wants it and it's now past its recommended date, are they allowed to give that food on? And if so, have you had any sort of have you had any kickback from people saying, oh, I got food poisoning from your food? Because there's I think there must be a massive potential waste of people being too conservative.
Yes, I agree. Ultimately, it's not really an issue because people post it on the app and most of the food is gone within 2 hours. So it's collected so quickly that there isn't that issue. But also, Olio, as they've said in the past, have never had any kind of kickback on food poisoning or whatever. So given the numbers at which they're operating, I personally haven't yet become a food waste hero, so I haven't gone through the training process.
Right.
I should, but I have 2 young kids, so it's kind of struggle to find the time to do that kind of stuff as well as work. But ultimately, within that process, yes, they will have very stringent things of what you can and can't do, but it's about, making sure that food that can be used can be used.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that we do often get things from the supermarket which are, they're going to be out of date by the time people get them because we're giving them in the evening and people turn up in the morning and it's the day after the date. And there is a difference between used by and display by or whatever. I can't remember exactly what it is, but we can put things in the freezer when we collect it if it's a freezable thing. So that's one of the one of those to get around it. There are things we should not make available to people technically, but if somebody happens to come in and take it at their own risk, we've not been. But we have to be careful in because we train our volunteers. No, you mustn't do this. And one of the things that Community Fridge says is we must not give out things with bean sprouts in. So we do a certain amount of composting. We reckon that we are preventing food waste. We're preventing things going into landfill because we will recycle the containers and bin in a responsible way stuff that's not fit to use. I mean, our local co-op is regularly giving us salad things which are not fit to sell. They've kept them on the shelf longer than they should have done anyway, in terms of what they look like. And people sometimes take those for their guinea pigs or whatever, but otherwise we make sure that they go into the compost.
Thank you.
Harvey, a question which occurred to me was, do you have any sort of measurement whatsoever on how much waste you actually have to throw away at the end of the day? Are there people who just cannot get rid of everything and they have to dump it?
What do you mean by in terms of the waste?
Let's suppose you've picked up, just take numbers, 20 pounds of food from a supermarket and you can get rid of 8 of it, but then the other 12 do go off. Is there any measure of that anyway? I just wondered how efficient your system is at actually clearing stuff before it has to be thrown away.
Yeah, so Olio will have all those. They have very detailed numbers because it's obviously all shown on the app. As in the Food Waste Heroes will be logging everything. As I said, like up to date though, it's kind of been the supply. The reason they've been able to raise investment like they have is because the demand there is so strong that pretty much all that food is being cleared and being gone. There might
Wow.
be Yeah, there might be certain areas where it's not, and I guess they need to readdress it. And that, as I said, I don't know what they are, but they will have processes for dealing with that. But ultimately, it's like all their marketing team is trying to increase supply on the app because that's the issue is there's such high demand that they need more supply of food on the app because it is all going when it's put on there.
No, thank you very much. I don't
We
see.
work.
Oops, sorry.
I'm just going to say that we work through the community fridge that has a very clear process for keeping records, and we weigh everything in. I mean, it's a bit of a crude way of measuring, but we can say the weight of everything that came in, and then we don't need to weigh out what gets taken, but we weigh out anything that's waste, and it's a tiny, tiny fraction of what we get in.
That's really exciting news. I think that's great. That's very encouraging to hear. I don't see any other hands raised. I will offer this opportunity to people, but I'm very, very wary of Claire keeping her beady eye on me about meetings that overrun. So let me say, Harvey, that was really great. Thank you so much for coming to join us. And usually on these occasions, I'm hugely efficient at saying, next week we will be discussing such and such. And this week I can tell you that next week is still a magical mystery tour. And we have no idea who's going to talk about what to whom. So come in next week just if you like a bit of excitement. So Harvey, thank you very much. And
Thank
thank
you
you
all
all
very
for
much.
showing up. See you
Thank
again
you.
next week, I hope.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you all.
All right.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oops, there's a question from Claire's probably guess. Okay, bye-bye.